So I'm going to show you how to generate this part in Mastercam using 2D wireframe geometry and generate a solid and then produce toolpaths to create this part using a milling machine. So first things first, let's go over to Mastercam, and you should always go over to your machine and click the drop down and select Mill and then Default. Okay, that will generate a machine group, and in this case I've already made one, so I'm going to delete it. Okay, and then I will click on Properties and click on Stock Setup. Now I want to find out what material that I can get off the shelf or from the store or the mill that will allow me to produce this geometry. Generally, it's going to be oversized by a little bit. So let's say that we were able to, we have a 4-inch height and an 8-inch width. Okay, down here we also have a 1/2-inch thickness. So we're going to define our stock in here by 4 1/4. Let's say we can buy that from the mill or the store, and then we'll put in 8 1/2. And I'm going to put in like 0.52. Let's say it's hot rolled 4140 or something like that. So then I can click OK. And before I do that, I can also click on Display. Now this will show my wireframe or a shaded block. And we can also activate or deactivate this in a different tab as well. So let me click on Display. And this is my stock. If I orbit using the mouse wheel, if I depress that, and then I can get the orbit function. Okay, if I right click, I can also select different views. So I like having the top view. Another thing you might notice is you might have the axes and the show grid on. So we have this big grid on. This might interfere with generating some geometry, so I'm going to have them off for now. Let's go over to wireframe, and under this tab is where I'm going to generate my 2D geometry. The first thing I want to do is create my dimensions of my finished part. So the width is going to be 8 inches, and my height is going to be 4 inches. Okay, now I have this box anchored to the center of my cursor, or if I uncheck this box, it grabs to the corner of my cursor. Now I want to have it anchored to center, and I would like to put the origin, based on my drawing here, right at the center. So I'm going to go back to Mastercam, and I want to click on this drop-down auto cursor, and I can click on origin. Now, because this is a cyan color, it means it's still active, so I can change my dimensions if I needed to make any changes. So I change those back, and then I can create a new operation, or I can confirm that this is the only one I want to make. So I'm going to create a new operation, and I want to put in the island in the middle here. Now this is going to be 5 inches wide by 1 1/4 tall. So I will punch in 5 inches and 1.25 here. And I also want this to anchor to the center. So I can also press the O key on the keyboard, and it will anchor to the center of my origin. I'm going to click OK, and I want to generate some lines to produce these little tangs on this H shape. Now I'm going to use line parallel, and I'm going to set my offset distance to 1 inch. Okay, now I click on one of these lines, and I can slide this over anywhere I want. And you see how this number changes on the left-hand side where it says offset distance? So I can click, and it is a cyan blue color. Now I can just punch in on my keypad 1.0 and then tap the Enter key on the keypad, and it snaps into place. Now if I wanted to produce more of these identical offsets, I would just click on this lock button right here. Now I want to click and create a new operation, so I also want to do it to this side. And based on that drawing, I have 1 inch, because there's 4 inches in total. I have 1 inch here to produce 3 inches and 1 inch here to produce 2 inches. So I will do the same thing with this top line, and you can indicate the offset distance. You might not be able to see it because of the gray background. You see how that snaps over 1 inch on either side of the line, but I want it on the inside of my part. So I'll click OK and confirm that. And now I want to go up and trim some of these lines. I don't need them. So what I'll do is I'll click on Divide. And I don't need this line, this line, this line, this line, this line, or these 3 over here. So now we have an H shape. I'll confirm, and I want to put a chamfer on this little island. Okay, so this is 1/4 inch by 45 in 4 places. So I can go up to chamfer entities, and I can select this intersecting line and this intersecting line. Now there is another way to do this. So I would have to do this for all of the intersecting lines and then click OK. But there's a faster way, and I'm going to back up here just a little bit. You click the drop-down button and hit on chamfer chains. So then this dialog shows up, meaning that you're going to do some chaining. So if I click on that line, it doesn't matter which one. I can click OK, and my distance is already set to 1/4 inch. So I'm OK with that. So I'm going to click OK to confirm. And now I have a couple of different holes I need to put in. I have this 3/4 inch hole. If we look here, okay, 3/4 inch and a 1/2 inch hole. Now my distance is offset on either one. So I'm going to start with a 3/4 inch hole, and I'll use line perpendicular. Now I'm going to click on this line, and I can drag it anywhere. Okay. Now I want to set this at 0.55 based on the drawing. Okay. I also want it to be at the midpoint of this line. So I can either choose to cancel, or I can select the midpoint of my line. Now I want to create a new operation, and I want to change this to 0.45 for the other line, and I want to select midpoint, click on this line, and then confirm, and then click OK. Now my 3/4 inch hole, I'm going to specify right here, and you see how the cursor has that different shape there. It has the 2 points with the line right beside it. Now that's just telling me that I can select the end point of a line. Now my cursor here with the line with the X, that shows me that I have a midpoint. So I want to use the snap to, and if you're not having any snapping functions happening, if you click on the selection settings button up here on this toolbar, you can also deselect or select whatever function you want to happen. Now, when you get into complex geometry, it might be snapping to something that you don't want it to. You might have to disable some of these functions in order to get it to work. Now, I'm happy with how they are right now, so I'm just going to click OK, and 0.75 diameter, I'll click OK and create a new operation, and I want to generate a 1/2 inch diameter hole over here. Now I can delete this reference geometry, these two, by just pressing the delete key, and I want to produce a part using the solid function. Now, first thing we need to do is translate or move these lines down. Based on my drawing, I have most of these lines so being the outside line and the holes, down 1/4 inch. And the island is protruding from the surface 1/4 inch above. So I will hold down my Shift key and click on one of those lines. And I can also just click without pressing the Shift key on those two features. Now I can go to Transform, tab up here, and I want to translate, and I want to move these downwards 0.25 of an inch. Okay, now it's getting harder to see, but you can see that small pink area. So if I go to disable my, where is it, machine, toolpath, here it is. If I get rid of my stock shading, I can see my lines a little bit clearer. So let's go back to Transform, Translate, and it asks, always pay attention to this little box here. Gives you the instructions of what you need to do. Now it says, select the entities to translate. I want to select all of those entities by holding down my Shift key. Otherwise, it only selects one at a time. So I hold my Shift key and click on one of those. It connects all of them. I'll select these two circles and I'll click on End Selection. Now I want to move this minus 0.25. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like what we need. Now if I wanted to copy them, I could have two instances 1/4 inch apart. But I want to move them. I want to reduce the amount of geometry in my view. So I'll click OK. And now I have what's starting to look like the wireframe or the bones of the part. I'm going to put it in isometric view. So you can press Alt 7 or any of the Alt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys, or you can right click and go to your isometric view from here. I will go to Solids, and then I can click Extrude. Now if I select Chain, and as long as this chain has no duplicate entities and it's connected from point to point, you shouldn't have any breaks in the chain. I also want to select these, and I'll click OK. So that will generate the geometry on the lower side. And I only want to go 0.25. Now if it's going the opposite way, you can also click on this Reverse All function. And that will change the direction of which you extrude your solid geometry. So if I click on that and I have it right more close to the bottom, then we're OK. Now I'm going to click OK and create a new operation. And then I want to chain this one and then have it connect to this other part. So I'll click OK, and now we have what looks like the drawing. The only thing it's missing is the chamfers. And we have a couple of chamfers here. We have 100 thou by 45 in two places. So this side and this side. So we have to chamfer the holes. With a solid, you can click on this function here where it says one distance chamfer. And if you click on the little drop down, we also have some more options for different chamfer sizes. A 30-degree or whatever. So one distance chamfer assumes it's a 45-degree. Now if I wanted to select a edge, I can have this selected. Now if I wasn't able to select the edge, that's because this edge button is not active. So I can deselect these two, and it only allows me to pick edges. I want to create this edge and this edge. My distance is already set by default to 100 thou, and I'm going to click OK. So this is the part that I like. This matches the drawing. I'm happy with that. Okay, now what we need to do is generate our toolpath geometry. But let's first set up our tools. So looking at this part, we need to face mill. We need to do some peel milling, and it's all going to matter on how we're holding it in the vise. We also need a drill, maybe an end mill, depending on how we want to approach this. So let's do our facing first. Okay, so if I wanted to start doing this, I will go to my Toolpaths tab, and I can set up my tool manager. Now this is going to be based off of what you have available. There are different tools available by default. If you were to go into your tool filter and search for them, you can import them into your job. Now this is going to be your job, and then this is going to be the library that you're going to pick from. And these two arrows here will transfer from the library to what your job is. So this file, this Mastercam file. Now, I can create an entire tool assembly from scratch if you wanted a new one, but we can also just go to Tool Filter. Now, if we click on this button here, we can select an arrangement of tools. Now, I only want to have a face mill, so I'm going to select None, and then click on Face Mill. And if you just hover your mouse over top, you get that tool tip that says Face Mill. That's the only one I want. Now, none of these really matter unless you're going to specify a certain diameter. Now, I'm going to click OK, and we don't have anything showing up here. So we go to Tools. Assemblies does the tools and the holders. I want tools. I'm going to use a 2-inch face mill, and I'm going to click this up arrow. It says Copy Selected Library Tools to the Machine Group. So I'll click that, and now I can go in and edit it. So if I right-click, I can go to Edit Tool, or if you double-click, it brings up the same dialog. Now my cutting diameter is 2, my secondary diameter is a larger size, we have an overall length of 2.1. None of this really matters at this point unless you want to do 4th or 5-axis tool paths where you're going to have to worry about collisions with other features of the part or the work holding. Where I want to change my properties for this part is my tool number. Now I'm going to set this at tool number 1. Okay. Now there is a function that I'll show you in a second how to make it default to sequentially numbered tools. Now I can also set my surface speed, my feet per tooth, my number of flutes, and many other factors here. So this is pertaining to the specific tool that you have in your shop. So I'm going to say that this is 4 flutes, my feet per tooth is about 10 thou, and my surface feet per minute for steel is going to be, let's say 600 surface feet per minute. I can say that this is carbide. This doesn't really change anything. So it gives me my default values for my part. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click OK again. Now that was just in Tool Manager. Now Tool Manager allows you to set up all your tools for the job prior to creating the entire or the tool paths. So you can also create them in your tool paths. Another thing, going back to having sequentially numbered tools, is linked by clicking on Tool Settings in this Properties Mill Default here. If I click on Assign Tool Numbers Sequentially, and potentially even warn of tool duplicate numbers, okay, this will allow me to have those automatically input as tool number 1, 2, 3, 4, rather than having to go through the library and say that it's not tool number 322, it is tool number 1. Now, we're going to generate a facing operation, and it says select OK to use the define stock or chain select an entity to start a new chain. Now, we have our stock defined as this red boundary. Now I can just click OK, and it will use that existing stock. Okay, I will click on tool number 1, or tool, and then number 1, and this defaults all of my values. It's always a good idea to throw in a comment here. So we can say facing, and if you're using 4th or 5th axis, you can define your tool holder in here. I just stick with the default tool holder until then. If we go to cut parameters, we can specify one way, zigzag, one pass, or dynamic. Okay, now these options do change a little bit. One pass means that your stock, or your material, is going to be smaller than the diameter of every cutter. Now this part is 4 inches wide, so that we won't be able to do that. So zigzag or one way might be more of an appropriate toolpath, but I'm going to click on zigzag. I'm going to say stock to leave on floors 0. Okay, that's the first thing I want to do. I want to cut this right to our 0. We want to get it to size. Okay, our cross overlap, our long overlap, now these are changed based on how far you want it to go across the part and then exit and then come back, how much overlap you want it to overlap from one side, one cut to the next. Okay, you can have step over. We generally want to climb mill, and if we have an even number of passes, we might end up with too many passes. If we uncheck this, we might have 3 passes that does it in one shot, and we don't have any excess tool movement. Auto angle will allow you to cut at different angles that would be more efficient for the part. And then move between cuts, I like to have high-speed loops, or you can do rapids. High-speed loops is sometimes easier on the machine. Okay, and you can specify your feed rate between cuts and roll in. Now, if I wanted to take a look at this without clicking OK or cancel or apply, then I can just click on these buttons up here where it's a preview path. Okay, I can hide the dialog as well. So it says up here, press escape when done. So it looks like I have 4 passes. I only need 3. So I'm going to uncheck this even number of passes, and I'm going to preview the toolpath, or apply, then preview the toolpath. It's still not going. We'll try that for now. My depth of cut. I definitely want one side or finished with a 10 thou step. Okay, so one cut, 10 thou. Everything else will be 50 thou. Now we only have 20 thou total, and this is smack dab in the middle, so I want to have 10 thou cut off on one side, flip it over, take another 10 thou. If we go to linking parameters, this is where we always want to have at least 2 inches in absolute to clear. Generally, you can do clearance at the start and end of the operation, so it doesn't lift up in between passes. Our retract, I like to have on absolute and 100 thou. Now this is going to lift the cutter above by 100 thou and wrap it over if you had this checked off. Otherwise, it will use the 2 inches. Now my feed plane, I'd like to have nice and close, and so it rapids down to 50 thou above your incremental stock, and then feeds in. My depth is going to be absolute 0. Okay, top of stock is potentially 0.01, so it's going to take 2 cuts. Now you can click through these options here, and really the only one that matters at this point is top, top, top. Okay, work coordinate system, tool plane, and construction plane. You can select your coolant to turn on, and then after that, these ones we are not using. So I will click on OK, and if you wanted to see how it will operate, you can click on this back plot. And then we can step through using these arrows, and it will cut across to our high-speed loops and lift up, and it does it all in one cut. Now if we had more stock, if this was 3/4 inch, we might specify 3/4 inch stock in our stock setup and then have top of stock changed in our parameters under linking parameters. Okay. So I'm going to close that for now. And to turn off my toolpaths, I can click on the little squiggly line here right beside the ghost and the lock, and that will turn them off. Okay. Next thing I would like to do is say that I have this mounted in a vise, and I'm holding on by the first just under 1/4 inch, maybe 200 thou. So I'm going to pick from the drop down, and you can click this open gallery button here, expand gallery. I like to pick dynamic mill. Now you have a couple of these different ones that will allow you to do some cool things, high-speed machining, but we'll just pick dynamic mill. And you can also pick dynamic contour. This is something that you might want to use for doing open pockets and that kind of thing. This is more for closed pockets. Now you can define your machining region and then your avoidance region. We are going to do machining region strategy from the outside. So we're going to take a 1/2 inch end mill and run through all this material, peeling a little bit away at a time. So I'm going to pick, so this says automatic region. This is a new function in Mastercam 2022. So machining regions, I want to pick, well, we don't have a chain for a machining region. So we're going to leave it to use our stock. So we'll click cancel. We're going to go from outside, that's our strategy. Okay, and our avoidance region will be this chain. If I click OK, and then click OK here, I can also click on preview chains, and it shows me what material is going to be cut away. Okay, this red boundary is going from our machine or our material up to this contour. Now I'm going to create a new tool or select from my library filter. So if I go into select library tool, I'm going to click on filter, and I want to select none, and then click on flat end mill. I can choose whether I want to have it equal 1/2 inch or have greater than or equal than. So this is the tool that I want to use. So I'll click OK, and it automatically changed from tool number whatever to tool number 2. Now I can also edit any parameters in here. So I'm going to go to my finalized properties, and I want to change my surface feet per minute to 600. I'm going to change my feed per tooth. I'm going to do 0.5 diameter cutter divided by 150, which gets me a decent feed per tooth. Okay, we have 4 teeth on this end mill in the shop. We're going to go 61 inches a minute. Okay, doesn't much matter if we pick carbide or not. As you can tell, nothing actually changes here. So I'm going to click Finish, and I will make sure that I have rapid retract on. Otherwise, this retracts at 6 inches a minute. It can be very slow. So a lot of the times I set this to 200, or I just click this checkbox. So this is going to rough out the top section. Okay, if we go to stock, I'm going to avoid tool holder because we're not really in need of that. You can go to stock. We have this option to rest material or rest machine. So if you were to use a previous toolpath and you wanted to go in with a smaller tool, you could use this function. Now we don't really need that quite yet. So if I go to cut parameters, I'm going to climb mill using tip compensation. I'm going to approach from the bottom left. Okay, I can also put this at 1/4 inch or even 3/8 of an inch. My first pass, it can be 0%. My feed rate is at 100%, so that'd be 61 inches a minute. Okay, we'll see what kind of toolpath this generates if we leave it as stock. Most of the time, if you leave the defaults, you will be able to be fairly safe. You can just change the options that you know what they do, and then go back and try playing around with things afterwards. My step over distance, I'm going to drop this to about 60 thou. Okay, that's 12%. And I'm going to leave my minimum toolpath radius at 50 thou. Now this keep tool down within a percentage of tool diameter or distance. Now if it, I usually like to have this at 300%. So that means if it moves 3 times the tool diameter, then it will have to rapid up and then over. If it's outside of that 3 times the tool diameter. My micro lift distance, sometimes this can be pretty hard on the machine, so I'll usually put that at 0. It slows down the back feed rate, and I'm going to set this at maybe 200. Okay, you can go slower or faster, whatever you want. This just moves the tool back through the previously machined areas, and then it doesn't collide. I'm going to set my stock to leave on the walls at 50 thou. And my stock to leave on the floors, let's cut that to 10 thou. And then we'll go in with a finishing operation afterwards. Now this is a new function as well from Mastercam 2022. So we'll leave this for now. We have our depth of cuts. We're going to leave this off. Okay, our entry motion. We shouldn't be having to use this because we're going to enter on the outside of the part. So this is generally for pockets. Okay, so we'll leave this as well. Breakthrough is if we were going to go beyond the boundaries of the part, and if you just cut it to 0, it might not cut all the way through, or leave a little wafer that just kind of gets pushed down. So I'm going to go to linking parameters, and once again, 2 inches on absolute for my dynamic milling. I'll set this to 0.1 and 0.05. Absolute incremental. My top of stock is 0. My depth will be absolute, and we know that we're going down to this face minus 0.25. I'll just check my planes, see that they're top, top, top. Click OK. And there we are. We plunge outside of the material and we create a toolpath, a high-speed toolpath using this 1/2-inch end mill. Okay. Now if you wanted to increase your step overs or change any settings, you just click the little plus button and go back into parameters. Okay, I think having a 1/4 inch, we can do some heavier cuts or bigger step overs. So let's go maybe 60%. We'll click OK, and now that kind of trims a lot of that tool path and a little bit of wasted time. Now this is all dependent on your feed rate and your depth of cut. If you have a really fast feed rate and a large depth of cut, so using the full length of the end mill or the flute, you might want to go 30 thou step overs, but 150 inches a minute. whereas we're doing a shallow step over or step down, and we might as well just go 60% of the actual cutter width. Okay, we can go 61 inches a minute. That should generate a decent cut. Now I might want to do a facing operation on this. Okay, so I can turn off this toolpath, and I have an option here, and there's a couple of different ways to do this. We can go to Pocket and select the outside of this. Okay, and then what you would do is extend your boundaries, or what we can do is even do a dynamic mill and do the same thing that we've done already. We can also produce, I believe, area mill would do the same thing. We can even do facing. So if we went to face and we use our current geometry, but we want to stop it from using that, we might be able to go into here, cut parameters. There's sometimes an option to have island facing. Now that might be in the Pocket toolpath. So we can do island facing, facing, okay. So let's just double check. We'll start over. Let's go to Pocket. I want to face this. I want to avoid this. So essentially the cutter will stay within these boundaries. We may have to generate new geometry, or we could use our dynamic. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch end mill again. I'm going to do facing 0.25 face. I will do facing, and we can play around with the two and find out what happens. So I want to leave 50 thou on the stock, or stock on the walls, and 0 on the floors. 50% seems all right. We can maybe bump that up to 75%. We're going to rough it out, and we can select a different pattern for whatever we need. Usually constant overlap or parallel spiral are pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to do 75% step over. Now in here, this was going to be the overlap for this distance here. Okay, that just allows us to have a little bit extra, not touching the material. So you can probably pick either Helix or ramp for entry motion. We're only dealing with 10 thou, so it's not going to be a huge deal. I usually like to pick ramp just in case there's a taper in the walls or a different area where it might not be able to get into. Otherwise, it does collide into other features. I pick auto angle and change your entry feed rate to feed rate. Finishing, we're going to leave that as the default, and we're going to just select machine finish passes only at final depth. Our lead in and lead out, let's shorten this to 25% on both sides, and then what we'll do is we'll transfer those settings over to here. Let's go to linking parameters, and we want 2-inch clearance absolute, 100 thou absolute, feed plane 0.05, top of stock is actually negative 0.25 plus we left 10 thou, so negative 0.24. All right, depth is going to be negative 0.25. We just check that these are all top, 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 and we generate our toolpath. Now, as you can see here, this is where it doesn't exactly stay over the edge. Now, it might not be a huge deal. Let's find out. Actually, it is. It's cooperating with us. So Mastercam has gotten smarter over the years. So it will overlap our edges. And we don't have to generate reference geometry and offset these in order to face that off. Okay, so it does our finishing on the outer boundary and then the inner boundary. We can also change that so it only finishes the inner boundary. So finish outer boundary, uncheck that, we click OK, and we can regenerate our toolpath, and we'll find out. And there's our finish pass, and it only did the last one. So because we're doing a finish pass, we may as well go to cut parameters and set our stock to leave on walls as 0. Click OK, and now we have the top face finished. So now with these 3 operations, I can go into my verify, wait for it to load here, and we can see the part being generated by our toolpath. So I'm going to turn off my wireframe and my gnomon and axes. And I'll just click the play button here. Okay, so now we've seen a little bit. So there's some cusps in here from our facing operation that we may need to either change our parameters in that island facing, or we might need to change that might be left over from just machining. So if I close that, I'm going to turn off this toolpath, all toolpaths, and then we're going to cut our hole. Okay, let's cut this 3/4 inch hole. And I'm going to go to the top view. Now I might want to go to either circle mill or helix mill. Let's do helix bore for this one. So I might want to select this diameter hole and click OK. I'm going to use my 1/2 inch flat end mill. Okay, I want to lower my speed from 61 because when it gets into tight circles like that, it goes pretty quick. So I'm going to lower it to about 20. We'll leave our RPM about the same. This is going to be the 0.75 bore. And I'll go to my stock. Don't need to change anything here. My cut parameters. I'm going to change start at center. Leave that there. I want to end at center as well. You can change your entry angles, but I want to cut 0 and 0. We're going to rough this out, 80 thou pitch. We can change this. It's always good to have at least 1 to 2 degrees. It all depends on the diameter of your cutter and the hole. You're usually pretty safe at around 30 thou pitch, but sometimes that can be a little bit low. So we'll start off with 30 thou pitch. Number of passes, 1, because we only want to go down once, and we'll go right to the final depth and then run it at 6 inches a minute. So that way it will create a nice surface and finish. Okay, we don't really need to finish it because we're going down all the way through at 30 thou and it does its interpolation, and it will cut with a 6" per minute feed per revolution, or inch per minute. Now you can change these values and add a finishing pass that will take material off as you come out of the hole, but we don't need to do that. You can set your axes, and we're only using 3 axes at the moment. This would be for tilt on your tools. So they've added a lot of features into this 2D helix bore toolpath. So once again, we're going to go 2" absolute. Okay, 100 thou, incremental, top of stock, minus 0.25. Now that that's finished, and our depth is going to be minus 0.55. Okay, so the total thickness is 0.5, but we're going to go an extra 50 thou so it breaks through, and we have something to pick up off of when we go to flip the part. Now, some more multi-axis stuff. Biggest thing, top, top, top for our planes. Click OK, and now we have our helix bore. Now we can see how small of an arc that is. And then as it exits, it comes out from the center. And you can even see on the front side, when we go to run this, if I turn off my solids, now it's punching through and goes a little bit beyond the excess material here and then back out. Okay, and it arcs back into the center of that tool, or that hole, with that exit arc. You can change them to parallel or perpendicular arcs as well. I believe it's under cut parameters, perpendicular entry. You can click OK, and it starts there, arcs in. There's lots of different options. So I'm going to turn off that toolpath, and then here I might need to select a different cutter, or we can use a drilling operation. So why don't we do a drilling operation? I'm going to pick this hole, or you can pick this 2D geometry right here. Okay, it didn't work with my solid, so I'm going to delete from here. I want to pick my original 2D geometry. Click OK, go to Tool, Toolpath type, we're drilling. Okay, go to Tool, and we will select a library tool. Go to Filter, click None, and then we find our drill. Now we have a brad point drill, we have a lens form, we have lots of different other features. This is going to be your drill. Okay, we're going to select 0.5, and this will bring up our 1/2" drill. If I click OK, now it's tool number 3. I'm going to select 80 surface feet per minute. That gives me a spindle speed of 611. My feed per tooth, 0.5 divided by 150. That gives me 3 thou, 3/10, and a 4" feed per minute. Okay, this is going to be drill 0.5 hole. I'll select my cut parameters. We're going to just drill it. It's not thick enough. We don't need to worry. And we go to linking parameters and 2" absolute, 0.1 absolute, because if it's incremental, it'll only wrap it up 100 thou or 50 thou from this face when we have an island, which is right here, in case we needed to go to the other side. Our top of stock is minus 2.25, and our absolute depth, we're going to say minus 0.5. Okay, that is the bottom of our hole. Now, when we take a look at my toolpath here, the point of the drill is still encapsulated inside the hole. Now we have this calculator button here that can add the drill point tip. Okay, so it says tool diameter, tool tip included angle, 118 degrees, finish diameter, 0.5. If we wanted to create a chamfer, that's what matters. Tool tip diameter and flat, not worried. Now this is the 0.1502 that is calculated from a 118 degree angle. So we want to add that to the depth. Okay, now this is going to push that tip just a little bit below. Now you can see. Now we will have a little burr around the edge because it didn't push all the way through and those angles aren't always perfect. So it might be good to go just another maybe 20 or 30 thou. So if we do minus 0.03 or even 0.05, let's go 0.05 and then press enter, it does the calculation for you. So I'll just delete the 2/10 there. So we're going to go minus 0.7. Now that pushes it just a little bit below. Okay, now looking at my front view, here's my drill. If I come down, it starts 100 thou above this top face, and then it drills so that we have enough. We have 50 thou hanging out, plus the drill point. Okay, if we didn't have any of those parameters set, if we went just to the bottom of the stock, then this only stays within, and that's as far as it goes. That's not far enough. Whereas if I put just my drill point, this still isn't quite enough. So we might get a little burr that kicks out from here. So that's why we throw on an extra 50 thou or so. So that 0.700, click OK, and now we have that. Okay, now you might be wondering, well, we didn't do a center drill on this. Well, that's because I want to show you how to order your operations. Now, I want to create a similar operation, but I just want to change the tool. So I'm going to right-click on that operation. You notice that little check mark? Nothing else has it. It only changes with what I select. You can also have all selected by clicking on Toolpath Group or Machine Group. Now, just make sure, pay attention to that little green check mark. I'm going to right-click this and go Copy. And where my red arrow is, I'm going to move that up. I can use these three here. I'm going to right-click and go to Paste. Now I'm going to open up my parameters, and this is going to be my center drilling. So I'm going to select my library tool, filter, get rid of that, pick a center drill, or better yet, a spot drill. Okay, I'm going to pick 3/8. Hey, look at that. There's a spot drill. Okay, so I'm going to pick this guy, and we're going to call it carbide. So let's go 600 surface feet per minute, and we're going to leave our, let's put 2 thou feet per tooth. Actually, let's drop this down to 30. Okay, this is going to change to spot drill. We're going to drill. Should we dwell? Probably. So this would be in, I believe, seconds. So if we put it at 1 second, we go to linking parameters and we want to go minus 0.25 because that's the top face, and we need a diameter of here. So this hole is a 1/2 inch, but this chamfer is 100 thou. So that 3/8 spot drill isn't going to quite do it. So we'll go in afterwards and do a contour toolpath. You can set them so that if you use this, your finished diameter is 0.875 or 0.975. It will do the math for you. But unfortunately, this spot drill is not large enough. So we're just going to go down just a little bit, and so tool nose is touching this surface, but we want to go in just a little bit, minus 0.125, and that should give us a good idea of where that point is going to be to pilot our drill. So I'm going to click OK. This one is spot drill. Now I can't see any names really, so I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to find my display options. These options here turn on and off certain things. So if I want the operation type, I can get rid of that or turn it on. Okay, I just want to see my comments really. So operation group comments, operation comments, that's really what I need. Okay, so I'll click OK. I just unchecked operation, so it gets rid of that. If I click OK, I want to save. And now I have all of these. Now I don't want work coordinate system or tool plane really, because I will pay attention to that when we go to flip the part. So I can turn those off here. Okay, there, it's a little more clean, a little more visible. So let's say that let's rename this group. This is going to be the top island face. Okay. Now, really all we need to do is chamfer these two holes. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll use contour, and we're going to pick these chains and make sure that they're selected like that, because on the left side of that arrow is where your tool is going to go. So we'll click OK. We'll go to Tool, we select our 3/8 spot drill, we'll go about 30. Okay, we're going to go at 60, 600, sorry. And now we'll put in chamfer holes. Go to cut parameters, and we can select. Right now it's not giving us the option of ramp or chamfer. The reason being is because at some point these planes decided they were going to change. So this is where we go to planes and we make sure top is carried over. So we just and then this arrow, and now it's all top, top, top. Now we can go back to cut parameters and change this to 2D chamfer. Now we need chamfer width of 100 thou on the side, and then the bottom offset, we just like to have a couple of thou, maybe 50 thou or 20 thou, just to have the tip hanging off so it doesn't create a burr, as nasty as some of them can get. I like to change my lead in and lead out to about 25% and carry that over to this side by clicking this button so that it has enough time or enough room to ramp in and start taking that material off. We'll set our absolute, incremental, top of stock, minus 0.25, and our absolute depth is minus 0.25. Now, this has to be the same on the height of the surface that you're going to select. This one does the math. So you don't have to do anything with this. So leave that as is. And then we just double check. Planes is good. Turn our coolant on or off. Click OK. And now, if we take a look, we have enough room for our lead in and lead out. And are we going to have enough room for our rapid? Yes, we rapid up and over this island. So this whole operation is for the top section. Now let's say that we're grabbed on by this surface down here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll flip it and cut this outer profile. And we can do that a couple of ways. We can flip it end on end so that we get in these sharp corners. Okay, so let's take a look what this back plot and verify look like. So I'm going to slow it down, and we'll go to stop conditions, operation change, we'll freeze on that. Now I'm going to click the play button, so that faced it. Now this is going to go around. Okay, so it left 50 thou on the walls. Now this is our pocket that cleans up everything. And then we helical mill out our hole, we spot drill, and then we will go in and drill. And now we go in with our chamfering tool. Okay. Now we have to flip this over and produce our H shape. So we might have to go back and change some things just so that we know that our toolpath is cutting enough material. So I'm going to create a new machine group, or toolpath group, sorry. Click new toolpath group, and we'll say bottom face. Okay, now this bottom face, we're going to flip it over 180 degrees so it looks like this in the vise. And we're going to face this 10 thou off, and then high-speed machine all of this. So how can we do this? Well, we have to specify a new plane. So we have these tabs down here at the bottom left. Okay, so planes. And we need to either create a new plane or use one that will work for us. Okay, so you can see the gnomon show up here on bottom. Now, does that actually move it up? No, so we would need to offset everything from that top face. So we can use this, but it's not allowing us to throw in our offset. So we can also create one. So create a new plane from a solid face. We'll just click that guy, and we want to make sure that if we were to take it in the vise and we flip it over, so left hole is 3/4 of an inch, it's probably a good idea to keep it that way. Left hole is 3/4 of an inch. So that means my X is going in the wrong direction, and my Y is going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to click these arrows here, and that looks more appropriate. Now, does that keep my Z upwards? Yeah, so there we go. I'm going to keep it there. I'll click OK. And it asks me how far do you want to offset it, and that's perfect. So we're going to set it as a torque coordinate, tool plane, and construction plane. So click OK, and now you should see these guys changed. And we're going to change that name to bottom face. Okay, something not the same as these, but recognizable. So when you go to change your toolpath and your planes, it's there. So I'm going to go back to my toolpaths, and I want to create or copy this facing operation. Copy and paste. So now all I need to do is go into my parameters, go to planes, click on this button here, and change it to bottom face, and then carry those over. Now I will be able to see my toolpath do exactly what it did on the other side, only by clicking a couple of buttons. Now I'm going to do something similar, but we can either do rough top section or create a new operation. So I'm going to click dynamic again, I'm going to pick from the outside. My machining region is going to be outside. My avoidance region is now this this chain here. Okay? We don't have the geometry for the solid, so we're just selecting that geometry, and we can click OK, and we'll click OK. Now we can preview the chains. What's it going to cut out? And that looks, to me, just perfect. So you can click that again to clear it, and we'll go to Tool. We'll use a 1/2 inch end mill. We'll feed at those. We're going to rough the bottom H shape. Go to cut parameters. We're going to leave nothing on the floor, and we're going to leave 50 thou on the walls. Our entry motion is on the outside, so we don't have to worry about this. Planes, we want the bottom base, and we have to specify our depth though. Okay, we might be right at that line. Maybe we want to go down just a little bit. So I'll go back into parameters, linking parameters, and we're just going to go negative 20 thou. Okay? So we're just below by 20 thou. We left enough to hold on to. Maybe we're holding on by 1/8 or 3/16, so we have enough room to grab onto. Okay? So now this is going to rough out that shape. We probably want to go in with a finishing cut for these outer shapes, but that's going to leave us a radius in here. So let's go to Contour, and I'm going to select this chain here. So if this is on the front side, I'll be able to see it lead in and out. Okay, I'm going to pick my 1/2 inch flat end mill, finish the outer contour. We'll pick 2D. We're going to leave nothing on the walls. My lead in and lead out should be acceptable. My linking parameters, I'm going to go minus 20 thou, and that should be it. So then if I turn off this toolpath, that's what it should look like. Looks good to me. Now it's going to leave a rad in here because of the cutter. So for instance, if I select my verify tool, so this will be the first operation. Cut out the outside. Do our island, do our holes. And now we flip it over and we face it. And then we take our high-speed milling and we cut out our shape. And then this is where our 2D contour cleans up the edges, except we have some rads here. We have to clean those out. So an easy way to do it would be to orient our planes once again and set it up so that we can cut these two sides, flip it over, and then cut with the tool sitting out like this. Now this is what I was looking at, is we have some little cusps for our pocketing that were not cleaned up by this outer contour. So let's fix that. So let's go up to our facing, the 1/4 inch face. We're going to change our roughing step over percentage to about 50%. That should clean it up. And it looks like it did. No more little cusps. So now we can go back and do our additional setup. So I've got my top island face, I've got my bottom face. I'm going to create a new toolpath group. This will be, rename it. This will be side 1 red cut. So then we have to go back to planes. We're going to create a new one from a solid face. And we can select this here. And if we have enough to grab onto, we can grab on by this small amount, or we can grab onto this big island here, which might not be a terrible idea. It's shorter in the vise if we can. I'm okay with this gnomon the way it is, so then we set up off the center, or what we can do is move that. We can shift it back, so we just use an edge finder right off of this face. So if we just click OK, and we can move it in the Y, or the Z here, we can make it 0.5. And if we tap enter, it shifts it down. So we can edge find that corner. So if we click OK, and we use this plane, this will be corner side 1. We go to Toolpaths, and all we really need to do is do a contour toolpath for this line right in here. Now we don't have a line to create, so we're going to make one. So if we go to wireframe, and we have 3D on right here, we should be able to draw that line right in there. Okay. So we'll click OK. We'll go back to Toolpath and Contour, and we're going to select this front side of the line so that we're on the left-hand side of the line. And then over here, we'll zoom in and we pick this side, and then we click OK. We'll pick our 1/2" flat end mill. We'll do side 1 rad cut. Cut parameters, we're doing 2D. We're going to leave nothing on the walls. Our lead in and lead out, we could probably extend this. Let's go 50 and 50. Linking parameters, our clearance, our retract, okay, our top of stock. We can click on this button and pick up here. So our top of stock is 1. But we're not doing any depth cuts. Okay, our depth is going to be here, so that's 0. So we might want to change our retract higher if we were going outside, but we're staying within the middle. So if I go to my planes, corner side is all selected. I just want to make sure that my toolpath is going to be safe. So it's going to come down. It's going to start just outside our edge. And we can always make that extended a little bit. And it's going to feed in. And it's going to skim that edge and wrap it over and do the same thing to this guy. So then what we can do is create a new toolpath group. Side 2 rad cut. We copy, paste, change the name, side 2 rad cut, and then we have to specify a plane once again. What we'll do is we'll copy this or duplicate, or what you can do is just come over and set this up from solid face, click that face, that's the side I want, make this minus 0.5, then you're picking off the same face, you're just rotating it around. Go back to Toolpaths, open this up, go to Parameters, Planes, and change to this plane, which we should also rename. So if we go to Planes, we'll rename it side 2, corner, side 2. And we have to change our geometry because it's flipped. As you can see, these lines are in the middle. So we can add lines, or it's using the previous lines as before. We can reverse those lines by picking our geometry and reversing, and then just double checking that it didn't change the compensation to right hand side. And then we can regenerate, and it's already there, and we're using the geometry from this backside that highlights there, whereas we don't even have it there. And now we should be able to click on Machine Group, so it will select all of these operations. So if I just click on one, you see the check mark move. If I click on Machine Group, it selects all the operations. Go to Verify, and if I go to my isometric view, there's our island, there's our pocket, there's our hole, there's our other hole, our chamfers, and then we started facing, roughing out, contour, and now we're starting to do our contour that picks out those corners. And then that is the completed part.